Okay, everybody, grab a seat. There's still a few left. Welcome everybody. I'm Tom Crummell, co-director of the Stanford Biodesign program, and on behalf of all of us at the Fogarty Institute and at Stanford Biodesign, it's my privilege to welcome you all today. My co-conspirators, Paul Yock, Andrew Cleland, and our lecturer's namesake, Tom Fogarty, are in the front aisle. Tom wanted me to let you all know that this was not a memorial lectureship, simply the 19th annual Fogarty Lecture. It's 4 p.m. on a Friday, and we have more than 300 people glued to their seats in the middle of the Stanford Medical School. That says something. It says a lot about you, that you care about what we do. It says a lot about the lectureship. It says a lot about the Silicon Valley medtech ecosystem, and there are many participants from many corners of the ecosystem that are here today. And it says a lot about our speaker, Dr. Jess Miga. The Fogarty Lectureship was established 19 years ago to provide an annual forum for nationally and internationally known experts to discuss, debate, and promote innovation. The lectureship also celebrates the historic partnerships, the linkages between all of us here that within Silicon Valley have created this very effective ecosystem that has allowed for remarkable progress and remarkable contributions to the treatment of biomedical diseases. Equally importantly, the lectureship acknowledges the historic, creative, and ingenious contributions that Dr. Tom Fogarty has made throughout his career. His contributions truly are legendary, from the balloon catheter and beyond. In 2000, Dr. Fogarty received the Lemelson Award from MIT. That's been dubbed the Oscars for inventors. It's the world's biggest prize for inventors. In 2001, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. That's folks like Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, folks like that. 10 years ago, Tom founded the Fogarty Institute to try to continue and perpetuate that legacy in the next generation. This is a not-for-profit, and it might be the first Fogarty not-for-profit ever done. MedTech Educational Incubator. The history of the Institute is over there on the banner. It's located on the El Camino Hospital 8 miles from here, and I urge you all to become more aware of it. And Tom's legacy there continues, not just with his continued contributions, but with the leadership of our new CEO, Andrew Cleland, who's in the front row with Dr. Fogarty, and Andrew's remarkable leadership. In 2014, Dr. Fogarty received the National Medal for Technology Innovation from President Barack Obama at the White House. Despite the fact that Fogarty was in the White House, it was still saner then than it is now. Dr. Fogarty's bio is in the booklet. It's worth a read, and it should be a source of inspiration for all of us. This year's lecturer is Dr. Jessica Miga, who currently serves as Chief Medical Officer of Verily Life Sciences, formerly Google. At CMO, Jess's focus is on technology innovation, partnerships and programs that improve patient outcomes. She oversees all of Verily's clinical research efforts. Dr. Miga is a distinguished graduate of this little university, Stanford University. She received her medical degree from Yale, trained in medicine at the Brigham and Women's, and then in cardiology at the Mass General. She completed her master's in public health and clinical effectiveness, and then joined the faculty at Harvard Medical School and was a practicing physician cardiologist, deeply involved in patient care, research, and investigation at the Brigham. In 2014, very quickly, she was promoted to associate professor. The good news for us is she's now on leave, having much more fun here in the Valley than Boston or Harvard could ever provide. At the Brigham, she was senior investigator on the TIMI study group. She led large international randomized trials evaluating novel cardiovascular therapies. Her research findings have been published in the New England Journal, Lancet, JAMA, and a few other high-impact journals. Throughout her career, Dr. Miga has excelled. She's a recipient of numerous awards and honors, including those from the Linnex Society, the Samuel A. Levine Society, the Zipes Society, the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association, and she is a fellow in both. Again, her bio is in your booklet, and it is inspirational to read. She's a recipient of multiple national and international funding. She is recognized worldwide as a superb cardiologist, investigator, and leader. She's known as both a thinker and a doer. Now repatriated to the West Coast, Dr. Mega's contributions will certainly be amplified through Verily Life Sciences. I posit to you that there's no better person to deliver the 2017 Fogarty Lecture entitled Surfacing Human Signals, the Convergence of Engineering and Health than Jess Mega. Please join me in a warm welcome.
Well, with that kind of introduction, I'll come back anytime you want. This has been such an honor to be part of this community, and speaking today is incredibly important to me. When I think about engineering and health coming together, there is no one like Tom Fogarty. And before I start talking, I just really wanted to take a moment and recognize him. So if everyone could just join me in a round of applause for his contributions. When I was thinking about what would be most important to talk about today, and when we were really trying to figure out where engineering and health is, I started to reflect on what were the things that we learned from the early days, for example, of creating a catheter. And you need to think about what is the need that you're solving and what tools can you bring to that experience. And I took that same energy when I was asked to move from Boston and join Google. And it was interesting because I got a call and I was asked to talk a little bit about my own history and then talk through the lens of what we're doing. But I got a call from the CEO, or who is now our CEO, and he said, I want you to come out and check out what we're doing, because there's an opportunity for technology to merge with healthcare in an even deeper way, but we need the right people in the room to do it. Now, the joke among us is, was anyone in the audience here in Boston in 2014, 2015? Anyone there? Okay, so that was the snowiest winter that has ever happened. So the running joke in our group is that I came out, I didn't have to shovel snow, and then the rest was history. But the real story is I did come out. I came out and visited, and I met a team of engineers who were working on the next generation of incredibly small biocompatible electronics. I talked with one of the individuals who built part of the major infrastructure of Google, and realized that these were incredibly mission-driven people who wanted to bring these tools into a space that was meaningful. And the group was called the Google X group. So we know Google's mission is to organize the world's information. Google X was tackling problems that were a bit more domain-specific, and usually in cases that had their own regulatory challenges. So when I showed up, I was sitting beside a group working on the driverless car, a group working on access, energy, and we had a handful of us thinking about healthcare and life science. And sometimes people would ask, how are you working with someone who is working on the driverless car? What would you have in common? And what I explained is, if you think about a car and how a car has to navigate the world, a car has to understand the maps, where the world is going. The car has many sensors that give inputs both about you and the world around. And then different things happen during the day of a car's life. A chicken might come in front. You might have a child run behind the car. All of these inputs need to be integrated. And in many ways, when we think about health, we have to understand the entire health system and how to navigate that. We have to understand the individual and what's going on with their body, and then how they interact with their providers. So in many ways, the infrastructure and architecture that you build to organize information has some shared elements. But the application and the need is where the real unique piece comes in. And I can think of no place better than my conversations today, talking with individuals from the Fogarty Institute and from Biodesign that are helping us think, what is that need, so we can bring the tools to match that need. So I ended up joining. We've now grown. We are several hundred in size. I was just talking with Dr. Mike McConnell, who is one of my colleagues at work. We spend all of our day trying to bring healthcare and engineering together, and I hope to show you some of the pieces that we've been working on and that are really more broad applications. So when we think about it, the convergence of engineering and healthcare can unlock human signals. And as I was thinking about this particular lecture, I wanted to really question myself, what is a human signal? So I used to spend time running large-scale clinical trials, and what we would do is report out aggregate results of a clinical trial. So we may say that there's a 30% relative risk reduction when we treat a patient with one medication versus another. But that was really an aggregate measure. It didn't tell you what actually was happening to that individual. And so about 15 years ago, I got interested in genetics and looking at the genetic underpinnings of response to therapy. And so when I thought about precision medicine, traditionally, I see it through the lens of something like genetics. But really, precision medicine and medicine in general is just an aggregation of human signals. Some of them may be genetic in nature, some of them may be digital in nature, some of them may be my behavior. So I've now gone from thinking about human signals not just as genotype and phenotype, but genotype, phenotype, and even behavior type. And these are all just human signals. We're sitting in the audience today, and you're expressing all sorts of information. We just have to figure out which part of it is actually meaningful, because certainly in the audience, people will say, garbage in, garbage out. The physicians in the room will say, please don't give me any more data. I'm barely getting through the day right now. But if we can figure out which of those signals matter, if we can create tools to surface them, and find out how to make someone healthier, then we will do our job. So this is the idea. Well, what's actually the issue then? The issue is that our current health interaction first starts with what I'm calling a decision gap. So I'll give you the example. I practice critical care cardiology and usually inpatient cardiology. When someone's in the hospital, they're instrumented. I know someone's heart rate, their blood pressure, their intercardiac pressures. I have all of that data at my fingertips and can use that to make a meaningful decision in that moment. If things go well, the patient then graduates to a step-down unit and hopefully home. Now all of a sudden someone's at home where they're making all of these meaningful decisions, there's information, but we don't harness that. And unfortunately sometimes because we don't have that information, we end up intervening too late. So this idea that people are making health-related decisions constantly, not just the few minutes they spend with us as providers. So how do we bridge that gap and come up with the right ways of addressing it? The second thing is there's a data gap. We only know the pieces that we see, and there is a lot of untapped information. And we'll talk more about that today, and the reason why some of the focus really needs to be on solving today's problems with today's biology. But I want us to really start to think bigger and try to tackle other issues, because we all know someone who is suffering from a health disease where there should be more information available. So I really want to think about ways to close that gap and surface these human signals and turn them into meaningful insights. And as we've started to think about it, there's likely three fundamentals. If you just wanted to boil it into the high-level summary, if we find an area that we want to tackle, we then need to figure out, do we have the right tools to collect the information? Can we organize it? And we can actually make it useful. And by being useful, it can be something that's a diagnostic or it can be an intervention. But in every case, we need to be thinking about these three things. So when we think about tools to collect new information, at Verily, we've gone on a bit of a mission. And we've challenged ourselves to say, can we create incredibly small, creative biocompatible electronics? So the example I'm showing you on the top left is a partnership we have with Dexcom creating one of the world's smallest continuous glucose monitors. We know that patients with type 1 diabetes have an indication currently for this device, but if we could make it small and efficient and cheap, would there actually be reasons to give people with type 2 diabetes more information so they can help manage their disease? So a very targeted use case. We're also thinking, though, not only about things that we know we can solve today, because we know the relationship between glucose and diabetes, atrial fibrillation, and stroke, but are there deeper understanding, for example, with immune profiling? So not only do we work on hardware, but we also work on molecular systems. And interestingly, both of those labs are in the same space. And the molecular group, what I'm showing you here, is rich immunoprofiling. And so when we treat people, for example, with these next generation of anti-tumor agents, there's a real interest in trying to understand how people respond, surfacing that information. So again, creating tools that can collect information in a novel way is one of a capability that as a group we're working on. The next piece goes to this concept of if you can't organize it, then it won't make any sense. And so building infrastructure to organize information is going to be fundamental. And we've done that in a lot of fields. So people like to turn to finance and say, how would we ever run the markets without understanding real-time information? And I'm sure there are people in the room who work with claims data. Usually claims data is about a 90-day delay. So we are always trying to catch up with the information. But part of it is we also haven't built the infrastructure to deal with rich device data, to deal with molecular data, clinical data, claims data, environmental data, all of the information that other fields have figured out how to aggregate. So really thinking about the infrastructure there is something that I think has to be done right at the beginning, because you can find yourself in a position where you've created a layer that won't be able to tackle tomorrow's problems. And then the final concept before we turn to specific use cases is the most important one. I'm known in the office to say, just because you can create a good widget, what are we going to do with it? How are we actually going to activate and solve a problem? And so some of the problems we're solving are direct to patients. So we're thinking about tools that we can get into the hands of people with diabetes. I mentioned that. Some of them are for providers. So there's a very exciting program going on with surgical robotics. And the idea is to no longer just treat the patient in front of you, but create tools that can start to image in different ways, save those images, and learn. So that's a way to activate. So we're taking those concepts that we talked about earlier and making a meaningful difference. And then finally, what about health systems? We know that there are ways to improve efficiencies. But I would argue that if we don't do this piece right, and I know that's so fundamental to the biodesign concept, if we don't figure out how to activate the data, then the first two things I showed you really don't have a home. So what are the two use cases that I wanted to share with you today? And I wanted to plant this seed around tackling today's problems, the known signals that we have to go after. But I also want to leave us with this idea that there's still more to discover and more to do. And when thinking about a known problem, I started to think about diabetic retinopathy and wanted to share some of the work that we're doing in conjunction with Google. As you'll see, when you boil it down, it's just a new way to collect, organize, and activate this information. So in terms of diabetic retinopathy, it is one of the leading causes of blindness worldwide. And as it turns out, we know that patients with diabetes should be screened. Seems pretty fundamental, seems pretty easy, but as it turns out, there are some real challenges. There are challenges in getting people to get the images acquired, and there's a lot of challenges in getting the right people to read these images. And I'm showing you an example of this is a problem not only in the United States, but this is a problem worldwide. And in fact, it's probably worse in many countries where the ratio between ophthalmologists and optometrists to patients starts to get in a proportion that we would never have enough individuals to read these images. So I think there's a lot of talk out there about, is AI machine learning going to take over the world and take over our jobs? As I see, well, first of all, as a physician, and for any people who are out there who take care of patients and really enjoy it, I think there's always going to be a role for the work that we do. With that being said, if we can create tools that add value, we'll use them to help our patients, and I think patients will use tools that help and add value. I like to say as a cardiologist, we've been using stethoscopes for 2 centuries. Not me myself, but the technology has been out there for years, and that's a tool and technology that helps me do my job. We use cardiac imaging all the time because it adds value. That's a layer of technology. So as we start to think about ways to add new layers of understanding and algorithms, as long as they're safe and effective and add value, we will integrate them into our practice. But it's through that lens as opposed to the tsunami of machine learning applications that are gonna wash over us. I think we need to stand up and say, here are the different problems we're trying to solve. Can you help us with these new technologies? So getting back to diabetic retinopathy, this is a major health issue that we are trying to tackle. And what I'm showing you here is Fundus Images. On the far left-hand side of the slide is an image where there is no evidence of diabetic retinopathy. On the far right, you start to see the pathologic evidence of diabetic retinopathy. In many cases, these images are read manually, and we have people go through and take a look and grade, usually on a 5-point scale. And the challenge that was asked is, could we figure out a way to acquire a lot of these images seamlessly, figure out algorithms to read them, and then surface them so the optometrists and ophthalmologists can spend time with their patient, potentially delivering the therapy, potentially helping them navigate the next route. And the reason that we're able to attack this type of problem now is because there has been a true digital transformation. So even a few years ago, the real question was, where are you going to store your data? And so I'll tell you guys a personal story. So I was, as I mentioned, I was part of a group running large-scale clinical trials. We would usually have, an average trial would have between 10 and 20,000 patients, run over 1,000 different sites, 40 different countries, and then we would get genomics data that would come in. And some of the files started to get quite large, and we were storing them on the physical servers. And I got a call one day saying, you've got to figure out a new IT solution. You're done. You are taking up way more than your space. And this was another phone call, kind of like the one I got from Google, where I said, I'm Jess Mega, I'm a cardiologist. Like, maybe we should put you in contact with IT. And they said, we are IT. So I realized we had a problem. And this was before cloud computing was as ubiquitous as it is. Uday and I were talking earlier about the early days of AWS, and now all the different platforms, including Google Cloud Platform, have made it so much easier to share information. And so if we now think about 2020, and we're no longer, I mean, there are, and I'm happy to chat about, there are certainly circumstances with that where having physical servers makes sense, but there's a lot of cases where cloud computing is changing the way we exchange information and what we can do on top of it. It's also led to distributed computing so that we can tap into a lot of the compute when we need it, but we can then share it with other people. And so we've gone from this change of not where you compute, but how you compute. And you might be saying, but we were talking about diabetic retinopathy, and now you're showing me computer revolutions. But the reason this is important is now it's opening up this opportunity to take images and leverage what's being done. So the next change that is allowing us to do these types of things is a different type of machine learning. And the old way of a lot of programming was really rules-based, and you would set up different rules. And I'm giving you an example of free stuff and spam and how the original programs would run. The new way is labeling data, giving examples, and then allowing compute to start to look for patterns that may be similar. So this change means that if you take something like an image, it can start to recognize it. And so I like to use the example of cat images. So I don't know, do we have any cat owners in the audience? Got some cat owners? Anyone who ever taken a picture of your cat? Yeah, you like taking pictures of cats. Anyone take a video of their cat? People love cat videos. Now the reason I love cat videos, I love cats too, but the reason I like cat videos is that all of these images have set up this reference for ImageNet. And there has been such modernization with sorting and recognizing patterns in images. Partially so we can enjoy all of our animals and our children and do all the fun things we do. But we can leverage this same type of image recognition when we now start to think about fundus images. Because as it turns out, from a compute perspective, these are just series of images. So again, keep taking pictures of cats, keep taking cat videos, because the better we get at those, the better we'll get at health applications. So that's my public service message. So this has been really interesting. Let's tap into this. And I spend a lot of my time, we partner with a group called Google Brain, and they are thinking about applications of deep learning and machine learning, and we partner and think, how can we then find needs and how do we commercialize these products? So in conjunction with them, there was this concept of, could we understand diabetic retinopathy in a different way? And so what we did is take thousands of labeled images and ultimately determined that deep learning algorithms had high sensitivity and specificity for detecting diabetic retinopathy and macular edema. And the implications then are, can you actually take this algorithm, have it help read these images, surface this, and it goes back to the concept of giving physicians more time to spend with their patients. And there certainly are questions of what is the sensitivity and the specificity, and what I can tell you is that there may be a chance that the human eye isn't the best eye to read these images. Interestingly, looking at groups of ophthalmologists, the inter-rater variability was quite high. So only about 65% of the time did people agree with one another. And the other interesting fact is only 65% of the time did people agree with themselves. It's not a flaw. It's not pointing fingers. I read, I know Mike's here. I know we have other cardiologists who are here. We read so many electrocardiograms, and I remember reading them before we had any algorithms or automated reads. And when you have a stack, we used to take them home, huge stacks of paper electrocardiograms, and you'd be reading them and signing them off. There's no way that is an optimal, that I would be the best person to read them. Now, I'm very happy I overread many of them. There are times where the rhythm may be off. There's definitely a role, but it augmented our way of providing safe care. So again, this isn't critical of us as humans. It isn't critical of us as physicians, but it's just pointing out that there may be things where we can get insights that are beyond our original skill set. So this was a paper that came out. I will show you two funny quotes that I'm showing them mostly because there's this world right now of talking about hype. But these quotes came out and it said, "The study by Gulsham and colleagues truly represents the brave new world of medicine." And the next one is, it just published this paper in JAMA, and it actually lives up to the hype, because I'm the first person to tell you that there is a lot of hype right now with AI and machine learning in healthcare. But I'm walking away with an optimistic message, and that is, if you find the right use case and you think about the clinical problem you're solving, then this may be a tool that can help you get the job done. And what we're doing now currently is creating, we have partnerships creating cameras that could be more publicly available, integrating that with the algorithms. We work directly with the FDA. We've leaned into the FDA. They have a pre-certification program. So they've chosen a handful of partners where they know that this world is going to be changing, and we have a very open door policy to try to figure out what is the right regulatory framework to work with. So this is an active project that we're working on, and I'm happy to chat with folks afterwards about the lessons that we've learned along the way. So that was a clear case of, we know diabetic retinopathy causes blindness. We know that people get fundus images. There are likely ways to acquire them in a more seamless fashion, and an algorithm was applied. So what I like to bucket as a known signal that we needed to figure out, how do we do it just a little bit differently? So now I want to change gears a little bit and say, how are we going to think about this brave new world and collect new signals that may have meaning? These signals, as I mentioned, may be digital, they may be molecular, they may be behaviors. How do we figure out how to harness that and make them valuable? And what became apparent is that there isn't one data set that's out there, one infrastructure that's going to answer this question. And the reason I know is because we looked, and I looked, and teams of us looked. And I see Ken Mahaffey in the audience as well, and he can attest to the fact that the idea was we needed to move forward with Project Baseline. And I thank Ken from the bottom of my heart. He's been a tremendous partner, as well as Sam Gambier and the whole team at Stanford, as well as the team at Duke. And what we have realized is that we need to come together with partners like you, with the American Heart Association, and really create the gold standard data, tools, and technologies so that we can start to untap this next generation of signals and try to prevent things like diabetic retinopathy, but whatever is on the frontier. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about some of our early lessons and some of the early pieces that are being built. And I think if there are two things to take away about Project Baseline, one is that it's a concept of building infrastructure so that we can work and understand patients in all of these different environments. And the thing is, if we can do this in a research setting, it's the only way we will ever start to leverage this in a clinical setting. I think one of the really nice conversations we had with the fellows today was the realization that in healthcare, unlike other applications, we really have to prove something works in a study before we deploy it generally on patients. There are a handful of scenarios where a product may be a non-significant risk product, or it may be something where we can get out there and then iterate. But in much of what we do, we have a responsibility to make sure what we're doing is safe and effective. So again, creating this infrastructure where we have a test bed, we understand how to gather this information so we can test different products and then commercialize them has been very important. So this idea of Baseline really fueling infrastructure. And then the second piece is really understanding individuals at a comprehensive level. And so in this study, which is done in partnership, as I mentioned, with groups like your own, as well as the participants. So people who volunteer are really on this journey with us. In fact, I saw one patient put on their LinkedIn profile that they were a baseline volunteer. And that I thought was perfect. This is someone who we are genuinely partnering with. And as we've worked with so many of you in the room, and I can see many of you who we've worked with, we're trying to figure out how to put the patient in the center of this, because that's how we will truly learn. And in this study, it really is the most comprehensive dive into human health. There are clinical labs, molecular profiling. We're thinking about different forms of imaging. We've created a device that I'll tell you more about. And this is a platform where we can integrate many new tools and technologies as long as we think there's something that can add value. And so I want to leave us with this idea. I said there were two things that are important about baseline. One is the infrastructure to be able to do that kind of work. And the second one is you need to understand all of these multidimensional data in a given individual to start to create an understanding, a full map of human health. I'm not saying that everyone in the world needs to get their genome, their proteome, their microbiome, wear 52,000 devices, have a bed sensor. That is not the message. But there are groups where we're going to have to understand those linkages so that if we're trying to solve a problem, I'll go back to diabetes, and we understand that we might need a device, but we may also need an interesting immunoprofile, that we have the ability to do it. So again, this is creating this human map, and then we'll use the roads and channels that we need. And again, I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So what has this been like? I want to share a little bit of the journey with you. So we launched in April of 2017, and within 24 hours, we had people from all 50 states lean in. And these are people across different demographics, age groups, different interests. We were able to find out people's motivations. There's a real schism in clinical research right now between who actually goes into a study and are any of those results generalizable. So at the beginning, I was telling you about the snowstorm of 2014 and 2015. I was also a local PI at the time. You can imagine that most patients didn't necessarily want to drive into Boston and pay for parking and walk up the icy sidewalk. And so we would end up missing all of this information. And there's got to be ways to try to meet people where they are. So people did lean in. It was fun to see. We were watching in real time. We had real-time maps that were up on the wall. We all came in at 2 a.m. and launched, and you could start to see kind of across the country people signing on. I remember telling one of the tech leads, he was walking some of the junior engineers through the process of what it means to kind of turn on different pieces of the product. And I was listening to him, and it so reminded me of being in the CCU when someone was putting in their first central line. And you say, okay, let's walk through the procedure, let's identify the anatomy, and it's kind of slowly and calmly walking someone through. And it was amazing to me. We were walking through our team, kind of what's it going to mean as patients start to call us. We had our user success team up and running, and he was walking through the technology. And the parallels were really, it was quite striking. So we got up and running in April 2017, and there are a few key pieces that we have started to build out. One is, how can you engage with someone, understand about them, get them consented in minutes, and also be transparent? Because has anyone ever read a standard consent form? They're really hard to understand. But we do want to provide all the information there. But using this kind of technology, you can use cards to surface, here's what this section means, and then people can go deep and read more about it. We even asked people questions to make sure they understood the consent. So thinking about, but you can't do that if you have a 20-page printed document. It's not an option. So really figuring out how do you engage people early, get them engaged, get them knowing what's going on. The second piece is people come on site and they go through Biospecimen Collection. And there's all sorts of biospecimens, everything from blood to urine. We also have a stool sample that's coming so that we can study the microbiome. It's been amazing to learn about how actually to engage a user around a stool sample. So we have a whole team of designers working on that. they're really excited. They're like, this is an awesome challenge. That sounds really hard to do. And these are teams, used to, I was joking with one of the groups today. We have an engineer on our team who worked on Pokemon Go for many years. And, he's like, yeah, I can get people to do this. But you want me to figure out how to design and engage people around stool. Okay, but these are the challenges that we have because we work in healthcare. And healthcare is a convergence of engineering and biology, and engineering and health. So it's been really interesting to see how do we get our return rates to come up. And it's been very fascinating to see how some interventions and nudges can really help in this way. And I'll get back to that in a minute about how do we understand health behaviors. That was sort of more of a kind of a lighthearted example. Then we also are interested in, once these samples come in, we're working with our scientists here at Stanford and at Duke, and the idea is to really work with folks internationally to try to understand what are the next generation of profiling that would be helpful. And we made a decision at Verily, and we made the decision at the time when we were Google Life Sciences that we could either choose to send all of the samples out to third-party groups, but what we realized is there was actually a fair amount of variability in the data coming in. And we couldn't understand that metadata layer. We couldn't understand what machine was the sample run on, with which person, was it day, was it night, what batch of reagents. And I preface by saying we really are trying to create a gold standard set of tools and data so that we can all use it as a community. And what we realized is it would make a lot of sense for us to bring some of these facilities in-house. So one of the interesting things, the original building on the Google campus where we were based, we started to have genome sequencers there. And we decided that it would be really important to understand immunoprofiling. It's not to say that we'll do that forever, but if we want to provide this gold standard data, we wanted to be able to have all of that metadata so we could really understand variability. And this is just an example of deep immunoprofiling. The reason why sometimes people say, walk me through the fit here, these end up being incredibly data rich to the point, and I gave you the example of where I needed to call IT and figure out how to store our data. This is not data that can really be stored on standard systems. And so all of this information is coming in and being stored on infrastructure that is the same infrastructure that houses all the cat videos. So I knew I'd get back to the cat at some point. So deep immunoprofiling, we also are creating a testbed for novel sensors. The decision was to work with a wearable device. We looked at a number of third-party devices, but the thought here was that we want to think about diagnostic grade signals. So the team worked and created a study watch that we are now deploying. We're open to other third-party devices, however. The puck that you see on the bottom right is a sleep sensor. But if, again, we can create infrastructure that can integrate data in real time, either through third-party devices or homegrown devices, then we start to make a step towards being able to surface insights in a timely fashion. Again, it sounds pretty easy to do, but it is much harder to do, especially if you're thinking about real-time applications. And again, this is being built, obviously, as a research project, but this idea that can you actually start surfacing information that's actionable in the moment? And I'll give you a really tangible example. So if someone has a device on, we want to make sure the device is on them and not on their dog or their kid or someone else. And there are things that you can look at, for example, stride length. And so I have a certain stride length. My son has a very different stride length. He's also very fast. And immediately we could pick up that the device is not on him. So if you want to clinically deploy a device that isn't a defibrillator or a pacemaker or a bioelectronic sensor, we have another program doing that. It's very hard for me to take that out and for my child to grab that. But it is very easy for other people to have signals that come off a watch, for example. But if I'm a physician and I want to make a clinical meaningful decision, I want to know that that came from my patient. And so we've been working on ways to start to detect in real time, making sure that the sensor is with the true owner. Because I'll give you an example of one of our early prototypes when we started a few years ago. I thought this would be a great idea. So we were calling our cardiac and activity monitor, and you could do heart rate and EKG and all sorts of funky things. And my son, I said, this is going to be great. I thought this would be a really good biofeedback exercise. And my vision for him was we were going to put the watch on, And then he was going to take nice deep breaths, and we were going to watch his heart rate go down. And it just, I don't know, it seemed like an interesting exercise. Now, he had a whole different idea. Immediately, he said, oh, this measures my heart rate. And if I start jumping on my bed, then my heart rate's going to go up. And he was jumping on his bed, and his heart rate went from, I think it started at 90, and by the end it was 140, and he was having the best time. But I think it really sent a lesson home to me that people can, they use devices in all sorts of different ways we can't presuppose, but if we're the physicians on the end of the line making clinically meaningful decisions, we need to know where that data is coming from. Just a story about how my son has helped in product development. Thank you, Toby. So this idea that novel sensors are coming out, we hope to be a testbed for all sorts of devices as we move forward. Again, we work with a participant advisory group. They're informing us of what they want to test as well. So really a two-way street. And then I was talking a little bit about engagement and motivation and really figuring out what matters to people. And I gave the example of sending samples in, but there's a much deeper problem that we need to address as a society, and it's how to engage people in their own health. And there's a lot of discussion about user-centric design and understanding motivations, and earlier in the day we were talking about loss aversions and carrots versus sticks, but it may be very different for different people. And the more we can understand and surface health insights and figure out what actually is going to get someone excited about their health, the better we are. And I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be the same solution for everyone. And one of the big debates we have around work is, are we ever going to be able to delight the user? So we talk about design and other things. We talk about a new phone, and it really is delightful. You get that new phone, it's beautiful, it sits nicely in your hand. We at least need to strive for that. But I think one challenge, and I'm hoping to go on this journey with all of you guys, is really to find out, can we engage people in their health? And what is that going to mean? And how do we partner with people? As a physician, how do I partner? But I really do realize that at the end of the line, I can be as helpful as I can, but we've got to figure out how to share that information and get people involved. So there's all sorts of interesting testing that's going on now. We call it the Baseline Lifestyle Program. We try to, again, we work with the participant groups and we figure out, are there ways to potentially monitor sleep or nudge people with different sleep behaviors, and again, these will all be results that we surface and share. And then as I start to kind of round this out, then how do we surface these insights? So I've shown you a lot on how do we collect information, what are going to be the right portals and ways to make sense of this. And so there's a huge effort, again, using visual design to make sure that what you see is meaningful. For anyone who's worked in the hospital, you're used to a lot of buzzers going off. And I remember one time I was sitting in the CCU and it was really late one night, and I thought it was some artifact, and I'm hitting the red cancel button, cancel. And then I look over and look back up, and I'm like, nope, that's VF arrest. Okay, let's go. And then we defibrillated the patient. They were fine. But there was so much alarm fatigue that you miss real signals. And so the more we can think about how do we surface this so that things are actionable, the better that we do. And I think there's a lot we can learn. This is a place where there's a lot we can learn from other fields and how information is surfaced. The other thing that's important is getting people to tell us what's working and what's not working. The kinds of trials I used to run, we would enroll people, we would follow them over a series, sometimes 5 to 7 years, and we get the results at the end. And what we're looking at here is a more two-way communication, and there's a lot of talk nowadays about the 21st Century Cures Act and real-world evidence. That's a big topic, real-world evidence. But what does that really mean? What it means is not only how do people behave or how do drugs or devices work in the setting of a controlled clinical trial, but what really happens when someone is using different, either a formulation or a device. And what's interesting is part of real-world evidence is getting what people call patient-reported outcomes. So certainly it's important to reduce hard clinical endpoints. So in my world, it was cardiovascular death, MI, or stroke. But now we want to understand, do you feel better? Are you walking more? Does this device really work? Would you do this again? And these are inputs that now that we have two-way real-time communication, we're starting to get. And as I said, a lot of what we're doing in Baseline is building the infrastructure to be able to do this. But we've gotten all sorts of feedback, and it's been really fun to work directly with participants. This is also a way of following real-time data and safety signals. Again, this is really important both in research as well as in clinical devices. We always want to make sure that we're understanding when things are working and when they're not. And then the final concept is really thinking about what is this next layer that is needed, what platform is needed for us to integrate all of this information. And that's where I go back to some of my early comments about building on top of systems and building with people that get really excited about things like the driverless car or deep multidimensional data. Because if we can apply some of those learnings, but yet understand what we're dealing with when we deal with health data. And a lot of times my colleagues will say, the person who heads our software group is phenomenal. And he has just embraced this mission and this vision. But sometimes on some of those long days, he's like, man, health data is really messy. And I think, yep, that's what we're doing. And everyone here knows that. But we have to start to think about how do we use these large systems to integrate information, but also respect what biology and what healthcare data looks like. And again, I think there are lots of groups doing this. There's teams I talked to today. But really this convergence of engineering and of clinical medicine is where I see the real future. And so what gets me going every morning is to think, what problems can we solve today? What signals do we need to act on now? But let's keep our feet on the ground, but our head in the sky. Because there are still people who are suffering with health ailments. And I feel it's our obligation to take all of these tools, and so many of them that were born right here in Silicon Valley, but how do we take these tools and deploy it in a way that people can live a healthier life? So I thank you. I thank Dr. Fogarty for this opportunity, and thank you all for joining on a Friday night. So I think we're questions?
Yeah.
All right.
So before we do, we started 19 years ago celebrating the intersection between docs, engineers, and business. And 19 years in, Jess has really shown us a 21st century way that docs, engineers, and business people intersect. It's an unusual situation where at a university we invite people from the outside world, but I think the porous walls of the university are really greatly enriched by the kind of presentation we've just heard. It's spectacular, and so Jess, we're truly grateful. We do have time for a couple of questions if anyone wants to do a quick shout out, and Jess, it's your show.
All right.
Come on.
I was so clear.
How have you found the reception from insurers and insurance companies going?
So what I've found is it depends on what the problems that they're trying to solve. So many insurers are trying to deal with large populations of patients, but haven't quite been able to figure out how to understand deeply the population they're serving and how to segment the population so that the services go to the right people. So there are a lot of population health or traditional disease management programs that are out there, and they'll maybe call it, let's say you're someone with heart failure, let's say we both have heart failure, they'll call us every 90 days. But it may very well be that I'll make myself the more extreme one here, but it may mean that I should really be, let's say you're doing just fine. It could be that I would benefit from more services, but there's no way right now. We deal with time delays. We deal with claims data. There's no way to really know what's going on with me. Another tangible example where payers have gotten interested is a lot of times we wait until the conclusion is too far gone. So an example about needing, for example, knee replacement, would potentially more prophylactic physical therapy would work. If you had a device on, and let's say I have a set of stairs in my house, and every time I go up the stairs it takes me 52 seconds. If all of a sudden it's taking me 55 seconds and now it's taking me 2 minutes and 3 minutes, and actually it looks I'm no longer able to walk on that leg, these types of devices can see where you live in time and space, and that made me a moment where just having a physical therapist come out to my house, get me stronger, can prevent a time where it's too far gone. So there's actually been, when you work with programs that are value-based and they want to pay for performance, pay for value, those kinds of things, the reception's been phenomenal. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, it's like an auction.
I'm curious about making the data available to, as it relates to the project baseline, and then if you all have had conversations around then potential behavior change, or that dynamic of thinking about what data you're going to present, how you're going to present it, and then that feedback loop between the patients viewing the data, or if it's, if there's a goal in mind, if there's a pain point you have to solve, or how that's being looked at.
So there's a scientific executive committee, and we meet every Monday, and we have Ken here who I get to talk with every Monday. Sam Gambier is on those calls, and so there's a group of engaged physicians, physician scientists, and scientists who are really shaping the questions that we start to ask. It is not a truly observational study, which is your second point. There are embedded challenges that will end up happening because it's different than just having a population and passively engaging with them. But once we have this infrastructure up and running, for example, even right now, we're asking a very pointed question around diabetes. And so that's where the true biological insights start to come from. So hang out with Ken.
Brilliant talk. My question was, this new intersection, 21st century intersection of technology and medicine, will it have greater impact on the developed world health, the United States, Europe, and Japan, or the global health? Where do you see the greatest value from this new intersection?
Yeah, this is going to be the cop-out answer. I think it's going to affect both. There's a chance that it may actually affect places where care is so distributed and the ratios of care providers to communities is unlike anything we've seen. And again, I mentioned I come from Boston where you couldn't throw a stone. I mean, you'd like hit a doctor everywhere, right? And I had a running joke with my husband's a lawyer, and we would go out we lived in Brookline, and we'd go out to dinner. And he's like, what is this, the hospital cafeteria? I mean, it was like so ridiculous. So many doctors. But most of the world is not that way. And so there really are a lot of discussions of could we think of a whole new workforce, right? Peers, community workers, caregivers, but give them the tools that they're not isolated. Can you also do epidemiology in a way? And there's some really interesting data, some of it that comes out of Stanford, of looking at different patterns, for example, with Ebola and where people were traveling. And I think there's a huge opportunity in some of these some of these developing areas. It's not to say that, I mean, you can see in parallel, a lot of it's going on here as well.
Thanks for a great talk. You mentioned the concept of meeting the patient where they are. And I was wondering if you can give an example. Well, I think for Project Baseline, folks might be really excited to volunteer for the program. Maybe could you give an example where there was some challenge in meeting patients where they are? And is Verily thinking about how to meet patients like in a broader population where they are down the road?
Yeah. So
That's coming from a social network background, Facebook employee.
cool. So yes, the idea was to start with this volunteers that really are engaged with us. We do product development together. Over time, once the infrastructure is there, the hope is that you can actually now no longer just have to do research in the four walls of a hospital or a clinic, but we have tools that are much more accessible to many different types of people in different types of settings. A challenge around health is, I'll give you the example of my grandfather. My grandfather had diabetes. He was a very, very diligent patient. He'd write all of his numbers down, but he didn't really think about himself as a person with diabetes. He thought about himself as a World War II veteran. He was really political, and otherwise, it was so funny. He would only argue when we'd argue about politics, and then was like an incredibly calm person. But he didn't think about himself as someone with diabetes, and I'm not sure he would want an app that every day says, hello, you have diabetes. So how do we figure out what motivates? I think the biggest challenge to really meet people where they are is to figure out what matters to people. And it may or may not be the standard way we deliver health information.
Yep.
Thank you for the talk. My question has to do more with the Verily organization and the metrics that you use to measure the progress that's being made with sort of enormous resources that are at your disposal. Some of the concepts that you presented here today are fairly far-reaching in their scope, they're diverse, and they're being setting. So my question for you, with your background and your assessment of where the team is at, what are the metrics that are used within your group to determine whether you're going in the right direction or not?
So I think like any good company, it's a really portfolio type of play. So we have some partnerships and devices that really target a problem that we know about today. And I think I mentioned earlier in the talk, for example, working with Dexcom around the next generation CGM, or even the diabetic retinopathy program that is on its road to commercialization. So you have to have some output. We feel that, that we want to have some things that are addressing today's problems. At the same time, we want to keep a long view because the world is going to start to think about health not just in the four walls and how do we create that next set of insights and infrastructure. And so the way we measure it, we have pretty clear milestones with every single project that we do. We have to be open enough to know when to take a turn. You don't want your milestones to hinder the right decision, but every single program and project, whether it's more long-term and exploratory or short-term, is on a timeline.
And I was struck, you Cover the Economist 6 months ago made the observation that by 2020, 80% of the adult population of the planet will have a supercomputer in their pocket. And so to get to the point, we can do what we can do in 16, but in 2025, when we have what lecture will that be? Maybe lecture number 28, it's going to be a whole new set of abilities to gather real-time data, whether it's climbing stairs, diabetic retinopathy, blood pressure, tracking over time. Pretty interesting. We got time for one more question. Yeah.
Traditional clinical research, we have primary safety outcomes as well. And sometimes we have all the trial because there's an acceptable rate of adverse events, etc. Right? And I was just wondering for this baseline study, you are facing the unexpected because you're gathering and analyzing data in a way that hasn't been done before. Do you guys have discussions as far as what would become, halting part of this study or shifting the way we do it?
So we have, we all think about it in a conjunction with our participants, but we have 2 formal groups in addition to the Scientific Executive Committee that are tasked fully with that. One is what we call a Return of Results Committee, and we have to think about how do we surface these insights in an ethical and responsible way, but also the day and age where you just keep the data and don't share it with the participant. It's not really in the ethos. So how do we work with that? But there's a wonderful, hardworking group that also many of them work on the All of Us program. It's the former president's Precision Medicine Initiative. And then we have a formal data safety and monitoring board. And these felt important. I think you can make the argument that some epidemiologic studies don't go down that pathway, but we felt that it was important. The other piece, going back to the All of Us program, Verily works in conjunction with the Broad and Vanderbilt to serve as the data core. So some of the data infrastructure that we're working on, we want to learn across programs. These programs are only going to be as good as they are in aggregate.
There'll be some time for discussion afterwards, but Jess, we've got a little piece of hardware here.
Excellent.
So we have had the Fogarty eaglet that has been presented at the end of now 19 Fogarty lectures. The idea of the young ideas taking flight, I think you've inspired all of us. It's been a real brain stretch, and we're so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. Again, Jess, thank you for really splendid lecture, and there'll be time to socialize out in the back if you've got some additional questions. Thank you.